My name is Tommy Graham, and I'm a history graduate of Trinity College here. I'm also editor of History Ireland, which is the country's only illustrated history magazine. We'll all be expected to subscribe before we now. It's a little bit noisy here, so if you'd just like to follow me inside the first floor of Trinity College, and get started. This way. And anyone else not mentioned? Sweden? Holland. Okay, that's everybody. Now, just to explain what we're doing here. Otherwise, you might miss a century or two, or even a whole millennium. Now, the main feature of Irish history over the past 800 years has been the conquest and colonisation from Britain, the neighbouring island. Now, we used to refer to this as 800 years of oppression. But since Queen Elizabeth II visited a couple of months ago, we now refer to it as Anglo-Irish relations. Now, before the invasion from England, in the late 12th century, Ireland was a Celtic society, and that's pronounced Celtic, not Celtic. That's the football team from Glasgow, or the basketball team from Boston. Yeah. Now, the Celts were not the original inhabitants of Ireland. Human habitation can be traced back to the Middle Stone Age, about 10,000 years ago. Small bands of hunter-gatherers. Now, the Celts arrived much later in the Iron Age, about 500 BC. And at that stage, the whole of Western Europe was culturally Celtic. And the word derives from the Greek Keltoi, which they tell me roughly translates as dirty, smelly barbarians. Now, when the Roman Empire collapsed, and Europe entered the so-called Dark Ages, this triggered off a mass movement of people back and forth across Europe. Now, when that all settled down, the Celts largely disappeared in most of Europe, except along the western fringes, and that's reflected in the surviving Celtic languages: Irish or Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, Welsh, and Breton, spoken in Brittany, in northwestern France. So they're the four surviving Celtic languages. Now, you will still hear Irish or Gaelic spoken in Ireland today, not so much in Dublin, but you might hear it along the west coast in the so-called Gaeltacht areas, the Irish-speaking areas. There is an official bilingual policy. You'll notice all the street signs are in English and in Irish. Irish is compulsory at school, compulsory for certain government jobs, it's compulsory for entry to university, for example. But this policy has proved somewhat counterproductive because, of course, what they should have done, if they wanted to revive the language, what they should have done is they should have made it illegal. And that would have guaranteed its revival, but they didn't. So, whether we like it or not, we are an English-speaking nation, as I hope you've noticed by now. We can't stop speaking English, it seems. Now, to get back to the English conquest, by the time of King Henry VIII, this is in the 1500s, so this is 3.5 centuries after the original invasion. The original invasion was never fully successful back in the 1100s, not because of any military defeat of the English by the Irish, but because of a more subtle process of cultural assimilation. In other words, many of these invaders went native. They intermarried with the local people, picked up their Gaelic language and customs. They started turning up late for appointments. And generally, they became more Irish than the Irish themselves over time. So be careful you don't stay here for too long, because we've always had this tendency to absorb or to subvert outsiders. So Henry VIII, if you like, started all over again, because by that stage only a very small area around Dublin was under direct English influence. And this area was known as the Pale, P-A-L-E. So the word Pale means a defensive perimeter of some sort, hence the expression beyond the Pale. Because as far as the English were concerned, beyond the Pale was Indian country, if you like, controlled either by the native, the unconquered, Gaelic Irish, or by the English who had become Irish over time. So Henry VIII started a second conquest of Ireland. But that wasn't completed until the 1690s. And the main feature of that conquest was colonisation or plantation. The land of the native Irish was confiscated through military conquest, And then people of British origin became the landlord class, quite often the people who had done the conquering. So for example, Oliver Cromwell in the 1640s, he paid off his army with land in Ireland. And then the people of native of Gaelic background, they became the rent-paying peasantry at the bottom of society. Now that land system lasted until the late 19th century, when there was a land war, a huge agitation against the landlords. So to bring about a bit of peace and quiet, the British government were forced to buy out the big landlords. So instead of paying rent, the tenants paid back a mortgage to the British government and became the owners of their property over time. Now, this was part of a British policy known as killing home rule by kindness. So home rule was the political demand for self-government, which the British wouldn't concede, but they were prepared to make concessions on other issues like the land in the hope that that would pacify the people's political aspirations. But of course, in the long run, that didn't happen. Most of Ireland became independent anyway in 1922. That's the southern 26 counties of Ireland. The northeastern 6 counties of Ulster are still under British jurisdiction, and we'll be explaining how and why over the course of the tour. Now, the city of Dublin was founded in about 840 AD by Viking Scandinavians, and we'll talk about the Viking influence a little later. But very quickly, Dublin became Ireland's main city and main port. So Dublin is halfway along Ireland's east coast. The River Liffey flows to the centre from west to east, so we're on the south side of the city at the moment. Now, we don't cross the river on this particular tour because there's more history on the south side. The medieval walled city, for example, is located on the south side, and in any case, the south side is the more fashionable side of the city these days, unlike the north side where I live. It's much tougher over there, and these differences have led to various sociological observations, you know, like what do you call a north side Dubliner in court? The accused, usually. What do you call a south side Dubliner in court? Your Honour. Anyway, you get the picture. So the old Wall Street then was south of the river. It was also further to the west compared with the modern city centre where we are now. So the modern city centre was the result of expansion during the 18th century. And many regard this as the golden age of Dublin's architecture, of the so-called Georgian architecture, because the King Georges of England reigned at that time. So all those nice tall red brick houses and squares, those lovely fan lights over the door, this sort of neoclassical architecture, Greco-Roman style that you see here in Trinity, that was all the fashion in the 18th century. Now, this eastward shift of the city happened long after Trinity College was established. This is Ireland's oldest university, founded in 1592 by Queen Elizabeth I of England, daughter of Henry VIII. And she described it in her charter as a university near Dublin, because it was originally to the east of the wall, the old walled city, which was that way. And it was built on the site of a 12th century Christian monastery. Now, that monastery was located roughly where that bell tower stands behind me. The bell tower dates from the 1850s, but one of the bells is taken from the original tower, original monastery rather. The oldest building on the campus today is the red brick building behind it, which dates from the 1690s. All the rest of these buildings here, as I said, are all 18th century, 1700s. So behind the pillars here to my right is the college chapel, and directly opposite, with the same facade, is the examination hall, which is very convenient, of course, because you get a very busy traffic, you know, between these two buildings certain times of the year. Now, the large building behind me here, that's the old library, and that's where the Book of Kells is on display. Now, the Book of Kells is an 8th century manuscript of the 4 Gospels, written in Latin, illustrated in this very ornate Celtic Irish style. Kells today is a small town just north of Dublin, which was an early Christian centre. Christianity came to Ireland in the middle of the 5th century, brought by St. Patrick. So that's why we celebrate St. Patrick's Day as our national holiday. Close awareness, something. Whether to have an umbrella or not.